at 2017. I think 2017 continues to be a watershed year for the Philippine economy because when the third quarter real GDP was announced at 6.9%, that actually represented the 75th consecutive quarter of positive economic growth. That started in 1999. Okay?
Sorry, sir.
1999.
1999.
Yes, first quarter of 1999. So if you add the four quarters of 1999, the four quarters of 2000, up to 2017, third quarter, you'll have about 75 quarters. Continuous positive economic growth.
That's despite the 07.
The global
recession.
financial crisis of 2007, 2009. I think the lowest that we recorded during this long 75 quarters is about 1.1%. That was, I think, in 2009 or 2010. Okay? Well, because the economy, the global economy, was very soft. It was in recession, especially in the advanced economies. And part of our output growth derived from external trade. And the external markets were not doing very well at the time. Output growth was actually pulled down, even as domestic demand continued to be strong and robust. Okay? So one can say that in 2017 we continued to see very strong, very resilient economic growth. But what is also remarkable is that price movements remained very modest. Okay? Inflation remained low and stable. And so far, for the first 11 months of the year, inflation averaged 3.2%.
Any indication for the year end, for the total year?
Well, I think on the basis of our assessment, we can end the year with an average of 3.2%. And then for 2018, 3.4%, and 2019, back to 3.2%. So you have an economy that is growing fast. We compete with China in terms of growth, in terms of economic growth momentum. But inflation in the Philippines remains low and very stable.
Excuse me, sir, but can I go ahead
Sige.
for the 2018? Kasi some of my notes here, like Congress and the President will
Hindi,
send the-
pupunta tayo dyan.
Okay,
Kasi we have to lay down the premise eh.
Right, for
No?
2017.
Napakahirap mahirap pong ma-appreciate sa 2018 without reference to 2017. eh.
Okay.
So I'm saying that we are in a so-called Goldilocks situation. They call it sweet spot.
Yes.
You have expanding economic growth and you have low and stable inflation. And we have enough buffers to make sure that growth is not short-lived. It's not a popcorn economy, but it's a situation where one can say it's sustainable. Okay? Our external buffers.
Sir, what do you mean by popcorn economies? It's the
Popcorn
no
economy,
bubbles,
isang ganun lang, tapos na. Okay? So as you hit the pan, those raw so-called pop will the corn start popping up, and that's it. Okay, but in our case, it continues to pop up, and in a very sustainable way. 75 consecutive quarters is not a joke. Okay, our balance of payments continue to be manageable. In other words, our trade with the external sector, rest of the world, we're getting enough dollars for our requirements for imports. Imports are necessary to be able to sustain economic growth because you need capital goods and raw materials for production, for domestic consumption as well as for exports. Okay? With buffers in the external sector, it also allows outward investment by residents. And high net worth individuals, as well as high net worth corporates, have been observed to be investing abroad. because our capital markets are very small. It's limited. It's not deep. It's not very well developed. Okay, so people with extra income, extra funds, would rather go abroad and invest there. Okay, now from our perspective, it means that dollars are flowing out, but that is an investment, and therefore we have a claim on the rest of the world, so that when the time comes that they need to pull back all of these outward investments, that's actually creating assets. So, creating assets, and for some corporates, we're using these extra dollars to pay back our obligations, external obligations. So we are reducing our liabilities. So on one hand, we're increasing our assets by investing abroad, and at the same time, because of these extra dollars, many corporates are either paying back their loans, their external loans, and prepaying some of them. So we are reducing liabilities and increasing your assets. Now I think very few economies in the world would be experiencing that kind of sweet spot, even in the external sector. Our banks continue to be sound and stable. And you know the importance of a sound banking system. There is financial intermediation in the economy. Funds are intermediated from savers to investors. And you have funds continuing to fund economic activities. Okay? Because as inflation comes down, you have interest rates that have been reaching historic lows. So that's an incentive for investors to borrow from the banks, expand their operations, and sustain economic growth. Now, on the other hand, you have the government. The government has announced that it's going to focus on infrastructure, on the so-called build. Okay. Now, what is important about this initiative of the government is that it recognizes the main challenge of many middle-income countries like the Philippines, so the so-called middle-income trap.
So you think we're already in the middle income?
Oh yeah.
Classification.
Although we are still in the low
end.
middle income group. Okay. Now many middle income countries would find themselves trapped in that situation.
Sir, we're already in the middle income, low end of the middle income.
And we are rising to the middle income group, middle income. Okay. Now what we want is to avoid that middle income group. And the way to do it is to address the so-called bottlenecks in the economy. What are some of these bottlenecks? One is infrastructure. Okay? I mean, the horrendous traffic in EDSA is a very clear case of a clear bottleneck. You cannot grow by 7, 8, or 9% when your people are caught in traffic in 2 to 3 hours. There's just so much executive and labor hours spent.
One way lang.
That's why sabi nila, ang pinakamaganda daw na Christmas lights EDSA.
No,
It's moving lights. Even at 12 o'clock midnight, you still have those stretches of lights, moving up and down. So you cannot grow.
That's on video, so
Yeah. You cannot grow. You cannot grow by 7 or 8% if your infrastructure is very weak. Okay, and if you also have to establish the link between the farms and the markets. This is one of the reasons why food prices are very high in the Philippines. Okay, because of logistical issues. Okay. So that's the reason why the government decided to go into building infrastructure to address the large infrastructure gap and make sure that we can grow beyond our potential. Now, having said that, then what do we see for 2018? Now, I started with 2017, and all of those things that I've mentioned plus not more than 25 years of structural and policy reforms, okay, with Congress and with the executive. Okay? That would include the creation of an independent central bank or DSP. Two, the dismantling of telecommunications monopoly, the liberalization of the banking system twice, one in 1994, RA 77-201, 7721, and then the latest initiative opening up further to more foreign bank players the banking system in the Philippines. We liberalized not only the power industry but also the provision of water services. That's why before you only had MWSS, now you have Maynilad and Manila Water. We came up with the answer to the so-called fiscal crisis of 2005 by coming up with VAT, the value-added tax. Okay? And then the BSP, we shifted to inflation targeting in 2002, and in the middle of the decade, we shifted to Basel II. And in 2014, we finally shifted to Basel III. Okay? In other words, banking supervision, which is consolidated, risk-based approach to the supervision of the banking system. Okay? What else? Well, we came up with the securitization law, the cabotage law, and lately we also expanded the VAT as well as the sin tax.